Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to Tech Tested. With the rise of Ryzen CPUs, it's never been easier to get access to high core count processors, but for some it's still a little too expensive. So today we're going to be exploring an X79 platform, 8 cores, 16 threads, on a budget. Ryzen has made it a lot easier to get access to processors with higher core counts, and a lot of programs are starting to utilize more and more threads. But for some of us, those processors are still out of the price range. Now your options are to go with a new processor at a lower core count, which is a good option often, especially if you're just gaming. But if you're doing any sort of other workloads, you might be better off going with a higher core count in an older platform. Now that's very difficult, and usually you have to do it on the used market. But thanks to AliExpress and those Chinese sons of guns, we actually have access to brand new motherboards for older processors. And on the X79 platform, there's a bigger advantage. You can use DDR3 RAM, which is priced much more competitively than DDR4 is right now. What I have here is a Jingsha, I think that's how you say it, X79 motherboard with an E5 2690 8-core processor and 32 gigabytes of DDR3 memory, ECC registered by the way. I got it all for around $200. You can actually get a similar bundle for less, but I opted for a more feature-filled motherboard in hopes that maybe we could do some overclocking. But at that price range, you are spending way less on an entire platform than you would even on an 8-core CPU that's brand new today. So, without further ado, let's have a look and see what's inside. All right, we have some user manuals here. They are in Chinese, and I don't read Chinese, so that's not going to be very helpful. We've got a little bit of a feature board here, but this little ad here doesn't have the same motherboard that's in the box, so that might be a problem. We have an I/O shield. You guys have no idea how excited I am to have an I/O shield, because most of the computers I have lost the I/O shield for the motherboard, so I get to have that. Here is a mounting bracket that actually ships with most of these Chinese motherboards that lets you apply an AMD CPU cooler to an X79 platform, which makes it much simpler for mounting purposes. They have packaged here the memory. Now these each should be 8 gigabyte DIMMs of ECC registered DDR3. So we've got 2 here, 2 here. Here is some of the mounting hardware for said motherboard bracket or CPU cooler bracket. We have some extra bubble wrap. That's always a nice feature, so you can like pop it. Although it's not a very satisfying pop. That's kind of disappointing. We have a SATA cable. Was not expecting that, so that's kind of nice. And then we have the motherboard. This is always there. This is always satisfying to be pulling these motherboards out. It's actually pretty well packaged. There's a lot of foam in the box, and there's even foam on the back side. Oh, it looks cool. I really like how they go with these green colors, and they do interesting colors. They don't just stick with black and white and throw RGB all over it. This is kind of more retro. Now, I went with a micro ATX form factor because that's my favorite form factor when building a computer. You do have disadvantages with that, not as much expandability, but you get to put it in a smaller computer case. One thing about this motherboard that is kind of disappointing that I realized later is that I think it only has one computer fan header, which might become a big problem with the case and the CPU cooler needing fan headers. We do get an M.2 slot, which is something I've never had on a motherboard either. And while I don't have an M.2 SSD right now, I do intend to get one hopefully, and we can do a video exploring the differences in the speeds. Not like that's never been done before. Another thing you'll have to note about these motherboards if you order them from China is they don't come pre-installed with a motherboard battery. You actually have to grab one of those separate. Fortunately, I had a motherboard at home lying around that I just popped it out of, and it's gonna go right in here. As far as the expansion goes, we have a PCI Express x4 slot, a PCI Express x16, and a PCI Express by 1 slot. We have 4 memory slots, hopefully so we can get quad channel memory going. And we have 4 SATA ports. Supposedly 2 of them are SATA 3 and 2 of them are SATA 2. We might have to explore to see if that's accurate. I think we've got, I hope we have, yep, we can plug in our USB 3.0 ports directly from our case into the motherboard. And what came pre-installed is the processor. Now I'm gonna verify Yep, it's the E5-2690, 8-core, 16-thread, and I believe its base frequency is 3 gigahertz, and I think it turbos all the way up to 3.8 gigahertz on low core count loads. On high loads, I think it's 3.3 gigahertz. So we'll explore that as well. You do get these nice VRM coolers and chipset coolers. At least they look nice. I don't know how they perform yet. And we get an 8-pin connector for the CPU, which is also something that's not as common, but with 8-core, 16-thread Xeon, you're definitely gonna wanna look for a motherboard with 8-pin connectors so that you definitely get all the power needed to run that processor. And without further ado, I think that maybe we should look into building the computer. Now, keeping with today's budget-themed computer, I decided to buy the cheapest dual tower CPU cooler I could find on Amazon. And this is 92 millimeter fan CPU cooler, not your typical 120 millimeter fan CPU cooler. But the reason I did that is because putting a computer into a small form factor case or a smaller form factor case like micro ATX, sometimes the computer case can't house a larger CPU cooler. So we're gonna unbox this and hopefully it's not as bad as it might be. We're gonna have a link to everything that we purchased for this build in the description of the video, and make sure to hit the Amazon ones if you intend to buy them, because that helps us out a lot. All right, now this is the Langshao, wow, Chinese off of Amazon, there we go. Langshao CPU cooler. We've got a couple screws. We've got another Chinese instruction manual. Awesome. Although it has pictures, so that helps a lot. And then, oh, actually I kind of like the look of this thing, if I can get it out of the box. All right. Here we are. So it comes with 2 fans pre-installed, which is bad, actually, for us because, oh wait, are they tied together? Actually, that works out. So both fans, that's clever. Both fans are actually tied together by a single 4-pin connector for your CPU fan header, which is really helpful because that means you don't need to have multiple fan headers for your CPU cooler. It does not come with pre-installed thermal paste. Fortunately, we have some, but it does have this nice little tab here that we can pull to take it off. And it's got what I think is a pretty neat little like brass, copper, gold look to the top of it. So far, I'm liking it quite a bit. And would you look at that? It came with the same or similar mounting bracket as our motherboard did. So we're doubling up on that. That's pretty cool. Now, the last thing I bought for this build is the case. All the other parts I'm using are used that I already had lying around, but I bought this case. It is the Antex VSK 3000 Elite. And it's a micro ATX case, and it actually has a 5 1/4 inch drive bay, actually has a floppy bay that you can use. So I don't know if we will be able to install a floppy bay. I don't have one today, but hopefully in the future we can see what a floppy bay would look like in a brand new computer. That'd be pretty cool, right? All right. Packaging looks to be pretty standard for a budget case. I forget how much I spent on this because I actually bought it a while ago. Let's just do it the old dumpy fashioned way. The dumpy old fashioned way. Come out! All right, well, we got it out part of the way. There we go. Finally. All right, typical foam. Now you'll notice something interesting about this case is, oh gosh. And it's upside down, of course. Another interesting feature about this case, or lack of feature, is it has no side window. Now, I know a lot of people like to have the side window, especially when they got cool looking CPU coolers and cool looking motherboards. But I don't think that's always necessary these days, and it does add cost to the case when you purchase it. A little bit of an overview, quick overview. It's only got 4, well, it's micro ATX, so it has 4 slots for your expansion. It doesn't have what appears to be great ventilation in the front. It's got these 2 little mesh spots, and it's got some air intake down here. But other than that, it doesn't seem to have phenomenal airflow, which hopefully that doesn't become a problem. Fully removable side panel screws. The fit doesn't seem to be perfect either, but we will learn to live with that for a budget case. Comes with a 3-pin fan in the back, no fan in the front. This is a 120 millimeter, and there's room for another 120 millimeter in the front. But another nice feature is it's actually got room to put several hard drives, which is another reason I was happy to get this case. Unfortunately, I don't think I thought this entirely through because it doesn't look like there's mounting for an SSD anywhere, which that could be a problem. Hopefully I'll find something later, but then you've got your typical input outputs up here. You've got your USB 3.0 header, you've got your front panel headers, and I don't know why they couldn't have done something about this ketchup and mustard here when everything else is nice and neatly black. But it's not the end of the world, it's a cheap case, and it comes with all of your hardware right here and a couple zip ties. That's a nice feature to see. A lot of cases don't come with zip ties, and that's gonna, in a small case like this, cable management is gonna be difficult to have, so to have those zip ties, that's gonna turn out to be a really nice feature. So without further ado, we're going to pull our motherboard back over and install the RAM and CPU, and then we're gonna start building this PC. Now, one of the most satisfying things about building a PC is hearing that nice snap from your RAM clipping into your motherboard. So always make sure your tabs are pulled out. And these RAM DIMMs don't have any heat spreaders. I've never really cared that much, but you may care. So keep that in mind when ordering one of these bundles. Oh, so nice. Now keep in mind, this is 32 gigabytes of RAM. While it's relatively expensive to buy DDR4 compared to DDR3, that's one of the primary budget advantages to going with an X79 platform. They do have bundles with X99 motherboards and processors. The downside to that is that you're then upgrading to DDR4 with a very few exceptions. So that will definitely affect your budget. Now, hopefully, I wasn't an idiot installing the RAM first. Let's see just relatively how this CPU cooler is going to fit. Oh, that's going to fit very well. So let's look into installing our standoff for the CPU cooler. All right, I am going to tilt the motherboard up so that I can look at the back, and you know what? This might be a good time to look at instructions, our Chinese instructions. All right, hopefully we've got some good pictures here that I can go off of on how to install this. Nope. All right, guess we got to get clever. Now it's got these, oh, I think we just use these larger screws. Yep. Just use these larger screws. Let me grab a screwdriver. All right. Now we're gonna tighten slowly in a crisscross pattern to make sure that it's tightened down evenly. Oop. Don't over tighten it because you definitely don't want to crack anything. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting because I do not have a tube of thermal paste. I have a tub, a very small tub of thermal paste. Long story behind this, but the application is not going to be typical. I've got to get some thermal paste out of here, and I've got a guitar pick here that I'm going to blop it onto the CPU with. Now, the heat spreaders on these X99s are a little bit bigger than Intel's typical, so you're going to want to use a little bit more thermal paste, not too much. And this application is not going to be beautiful, but it's going to work. And then we are going to install. Now, because the exhaust goes out the back of the case and the motherboard is going to be facing this way, we want to make sure that the orientation of the fans is pushing air towards the I/O shield. And then one thing you may want to consider is the position of your fan cable before you install it. Now our CPU fan header is up here, so we're going to run the cable like this. Lower the CPU cooler. I've never installed this thing before, but it could have a better design. What the heck? It is just spring-loaded. That's really weird. I feel like I'm gonna break something. Like, very much like I'm gonna break something. Jeez, it's really tight. Tight isn't necessarily bad, but it is nerve-wracking. All right, our CPU cooler is installed. So now let's install that all-important battery. And then let's put it in our case. All right, we're gonna start installing things in the case. The standoffs did not come pre-installed, which is kind of a bummer. But the one advantage we do have from that is, actually, maybe I should install the power supply first. Yeah, I think I should install the power supply first. Oh no. You know what, we're gonna pull the power supply out because it'll be a lot easier to get to some of these standoffs without the power supply, and we'll see if that was a mistake or not. All right, we have all of our standoffs in, and we're going back in with the power supply. All right, the power supply is in, and we are going to start hooking up other components. Now here we've got our 24-pin connector, which is going to go where 24-pin connectors go, in the 24-pin connector socket. Shocker, I know. Man, this stuff is not easy to get to. This case, I like some of the features of this case, but it's not easy to work in. Granted, it's small form factor, so I should probably stop whining, but that's just my first impressions. Since we don't have a disk drive or anything to go in our 5 1/4 inch bay, we can actually use that to do some of our cable management and just start shoving cables in there, which should hopefully clean things up a little bit. We can also take our back panel off in a minute. Actually, I don't think we'll need this Molex connector at all, so we can remove that from the power supply. That can come out. And then we will need to save our SATA for our hard drives and our PCI Express power for our graphics cards. So we're gonna move on to the front panel headers. Also, I was wrong about this motherboard. It actually does have a secondary fan header, which is really nice because I was really worried that we weren't going to be able to use any case fans. Now, as far as I can tell, it only has 2, so any other fans you install in a case are going to need to be powered and operated in some other way. So keep that in mind. Also, this fan in the back is only a 3-pin, but the header on the motherboard is a 4-pin. Now, that's not a problem for using it, but just keep in mind you're going to have less control over that fan than if you had a 4-pin to use pulse width modulation. All right, a front USB 3 header is in a similar spot. Reset switch, power LED. This is where the motherboard manuals might actually come in handy. Oh, sweet. So it does have a little diagram here for your front panel headers, which is nice, and it does have some of it in English, which is extremely helpful for us. So next we're going to be installing our hard drives, and now that I'm looking at it, I probably should have done that before just about everything because it has to go in here. And so let's actually pull the front panel off. Dang it. Yep, that doesn't help me at all. All right. Now what I'm doing for storage is I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive and a 120 gigabyte SSD because remember, as I said, this is all used components, mostly used components that we are installing in here just to keep our budget down. So this guy is quite old, but it is 1 terabyte and it's going to be interesting to try to snake it in here. All right, we're gonna be installing the graphics card now. Now this is just a PowerColor R9 270. If you guys even remember what that is, it's actually a rebranded HD 7850. Again, this is a used part. We're not gonna be, if we ever upgrade the computer, this is not gonna be staying in it. This is just so we can get a post screen because the focus of this build is actually on the processor. I'm also going to try to remove these clips here, which this is another cost-saving measure they do on these cheap cases is they don't put reusable clips, which I maybe should have done this before I installed the motherboard. No going back now. Some of the places they cut costs, I would rather they have not and spent a little bit more. Another thing to keep in mind with this case is there is no vent on the bottom. So your graphics card is only going to be able to suck in air that comes through the front. And since it doesn't have a front fan, that's going to be difficult. So if you get this case, I would very at least recommend either putting a front fan in or maybe even, you know what? We're going to put that back fan as an intake because that's probably going to be much better for performance than if we didn't do that. If we had it just as exhaust, that probably wouldn't work as well. All right, the PC is built. The cable management kind of sucks, which is okay because we've got a fully covered side panel to go on here, but we figured we'd show you guys our very first boot. Now this solid state drive already has Windows installed, so assuming nothing went wrong with the build, this should be pretty uneventful. We might already have a problem. Oh, yes! Come on, come on, come on. Yes! It's not booting very quickly, but it's probably, so this was on a different platform before. This SSD was installed on a different platform before, so it might be taking a second for it to recognize the new processor, motherboard, and RAM and such. Oh, yep, see, it's recognizing the new devices. Okay, it's trying again. It's trying again. You can do it. You can do it. Man, that's annoying. I didn't think that would bother me so much. I'd seen like videos of other people with similar motherboards and them complaining about the beeps. And I'm like, it's just a couple beeps. That is annoying. Yay! That was pretty quick, actually. All right, so let's go to CPU Z and see what we have here. Make sure that we've got everything we paid for. All right, there we go. E5 2690, max TDP 135 watts. We're boosting up all the way to 3.6 at times. 8 cores, 16 threads. Let's check our memory. We have 32 gigabytes of DRAM frequency. This is basically 800, and you double that for your RAM frequency. So we're running 1600 megahertz on our memory, which is awesome. I didn't even realize I got 1600 megahertz memory. And it's in quad channel. Awesome. So we've got quad channel memory, 8 cores, 16 threads, which means when you've got this many threads, you got to run Cinebench, right? Oh, wow. I have not seen that many threads in real life before. All right, so I made a bit of a boo-boo. So if you're wondering if I'm an idiot, yeah, I'm an idiot. I'm gonna show you what I did wrong, but I'm also gonna explain it. Remember when I was showing you that fancy new CPU cooler I got and that little plastic that was on the bottom of it? I'm pretty sure I forgot to take it off. And the reason I know that is we tried to do a Cinebench run on the new processor and our scores were really lousy. So I ran a temperature monitoring program while running Cinebench, and the temperature skyrocketed upwards of 90 plus degrees Celsius, and it was thermal throttling the processor down below 2 gigahertz, and I saw it as low as 1.2 gigahertz. So we're gonna power down the PC. We're gonna see if that's actually what I did wrong. All right, let's see if I did what I think I did. If I can get this thing off. And looky, there it is. I am an idiot. So, as you can see, the thermal paste is nicely applied to this plastic piece. Hopefully, get much better scores now. All right, so we have our results for Cinebench, and we did a lot better the second time after we removed the plastic barrier between the CPU and the CPU cooler. And we were able to keep a stable 3.3 gigahertz all the way through the run, and our multi-threaded performance was similar to that of an i7-7700K. Now that processor only has 4 cores and 8 threads to our 8 cores and 16 threads, and we didn't have time to do a single core run. We'll do that in another upcoming video, but needless to say, that processor is still much more expensive on the used market, and this whole platform costs us about $200. Is it a great value? Well, we're gonna do some more benchmarking to figure that out, and we'll show you that in an upcoming video. But it was a fun little project to work on. The CPU cooler, I think I would actually recommend, especially if you're going for a smaller form factor case like this where a bigger cooler might not fit. It kept our processor down at a max of 65 degrees Celsius during the whole Cinebench run. And it actually was pretty dang quiet too, which is a really nice feature to have. If you're gonna be overclocking, I'm not sure I'd recommend the CPU cooler, but for a processor that's locked like a used Xeon, that's gonna be perfectly fine. The case, on the other hand, I don't think I'm gonna recommend the case. I like the way it looks, but the cable management is bad, and they cut some corners where I don't think they should have. I would have been happy to spend a little bit more money for features that they left out, especially the expansion slot covers. Trying to get those out was a pain in the butt. Yes, I should have done it before I installed the motherboard, but nonetheless, if they were screw type, wouldn't have been a problem. Cable management is really terrible, but it does have some cool features. It looks good, and it's got a spot for a floppy drive. Like, that's just cool. So if they had spent a little bit more money, I think more people would be more interested in buying this, but it's not something I could recommend. Now, if you want to compare this to a more modern 8-core processor, our video editor Josh has a Ryzen 3700X, and his multi-threaded score was almost double what we got. So it doesn't really compete with modern 8-core processors, but it's also a lot cheaper than modern 8-core processors. So there's a bit of a give and take there. I really liked the motherboard working with it. I still want to get into the BIOS and figure some things out, and we'll go into more depth on that later. But overall, the platform I think is a lot of fun to work with. It may not be the best value, but if you're on a tight budget and need more cores, it might be a good route to go. Thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on all of our social media platforms.